Hello and welcome to this brand new episode of the Parenting Truth and Dare podcast. Today, I have a very special guest with me. I have David Knight joining me from the UK, and it is my honor and privilege to introduce him to all of you listeners. His work is very inspirational. In fact, one of the reasons I requested him for this interview was because the work that he's doing is extremely important for us parents to understand and to really see how we can contribute in building 21st century skills in our children, right? So, David, with your permission, I will just give a brief introduction.
Thank you.
David is the chairman and co-founder of DefactoED, a leading global provider of 21st century skills for K-12 students. K-12 is kindergarten through grade 12 students. Operating in India and across more than 12 countries in Asia, DefactoED now collaborates closely with school leaders to prepare students for the demands and opportunities of the modern world. Before transitioning to the education sector in 2017, David had a distinguished career in business, serving as the consulting partner at PwC for nearly 20 years. During his tenure at PwC, he held senior leadership roles and led large-scale change management programs for some of the most recognized multinational companies. David is a fellow of the UK Association of Corporate Treasurers and holds an honours degree from Exeter University, UK. David, a very warm welcome to the Parenting Truth and Dare podcast from all of us and from our parents.
Ritika, thank you so much. I'm honoured to be invited to join your network. It's fantastic.
Thank you so much. So let's just first understand a little bit, because DefactoED is focusing on 21st century skills. I wanted to understand from your perspective, what do you think are the most crucial 21st century skills that we should be aware of that will help us, our families, and our children succeed in the next 10, 20, 30 years?
Yeah, well, this is a good question to kick off on, because people band around this whole discussion on 21st century skills, talking very generally, very often about that subject. But I guess that, and I'd start by saying I don't think necessarily there's a standard definition of these skills. But what we would see, I guess we would see it in two areas, really. The skill set sort of falls into two groupings. One is around having a very sound understanding of technology and how this can support you in your working life and home life. You know, so there's a whole piece around technology here. But then linked, so which is a sort of content element of it. But the other element of it, which we do talk about a lot in the school system, obviously, are the 4 C's. We talk about things like curiosity, critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and so on. And I would add a 5th C. When we talk to schools about this stuff, we add a 5th C, which is all around confidence, which is essentially ensuring that, you know, we develop our kids with those characteristics. Now, one thing about 21st century skills, and when we talk about things like technology in particular, people immediately start thinking, well, that doesn't apply to me because I'm a humanities or an arts student or something, and that's where I'm going to be. But actually, all of those 2 buckets of skills that I describe actually have a relevance to everyone, every student, no matter what the academic focus of their child might be at school. Everyone needs to develop these skills. You know, you can see, for example, you know, I have a daughter who's in the movie industry, and you know, there's been an issue about artificial intelligence in the movie industry, as we saw a lot of, you know, screen actors on strike because it was sort of seeping into the industry without being properly understood or controlled, which is a reaction. So, you know, you need to understand these things, even if you're doing movies and arts, as much as you may be doing the science or data science or computer science. Yeah. And I just add one other thing, if I may, just on the introduction here, that there's a lot of language around digital natives. You know, we hear these words bandied around with our kids, particularly the younger children these days. We think our kids are growing up in a digital world, therefore they have a good understanding of digital and they're digital literate. Well, let me suggest to you that they're not digitally literate. They're social media literate and social media natives, these kids. Our kids are living in the world of social media, but actually most of them have a very little or low level of what I would refer to as digital literacy. And I can come on and talk about more about that in a moment. So just because you think your kids are playing around with handsets or You know, they appear to be on the technology all the time. Much of the time they're spending not doing stuff which is digitally literate. It's actually, it's all around the social media games and stuff that the kids are playing. So I do like to make that distinction always at the beginning of these conversations. Cool.
So I think this is a very important point that you touched on, the digital literacy, the distinction between being social media natives and actually digital natives or digital literate. Can you elaborate a little bit more now that we are on this topic? In fact, there were two things that came out of this. You talked about the 4 Cs, but I wanted to ask from you that in India, you're working in a demographic which has always valued a 5th C, which is competition, right? So how can you move people from the thought of competing to collaborating? I think that is my follow-up question. But before that, if you can just make a distinction between the digital literate versus the social media literacy. Yeah.
Yeah, well, the issue of digital literacy is an interesting one, because I think what we try and teach our kids in the courses that we're running on digital is an awareness, really, of all the technologies that are around us in our everyday lives now, and also what's coming down the funnel. Because, you know, one thing in fact, one of the elements of one of our courses is a course on Moore's law. Gordon Moore was a guy who was at the top of Intel back in the 60s, and he predicted that the pace of the internet would, you know, technology, I should say, not the internet, that technology would double at the pace every 18 months or so. And, you know, that was a projection which nobody believed of in the mid 60s. But of course, that's come to fruition. You know, things are moving so fast. So digital literacy is about understanding all those different technologies. It's about understanding things like the cloud, things like the Internet of Things, thinking, you know, 3D printing. How do they, you know, what are these technologies? How they affect our lives? To give the kids really some confidence to sort of begin to explore these technologies, because they will be, you know, they'll be facing using these technologies in different ways in their lives in the future. And as we talked about, I mentioned confidence in my description of the perhaps my 5th C. It is about giving kids the confidence to really embrace all these technologies and not to be shy of them. You know, many people of my generation, you know, I guess I'm a man who's naturally very curious, but I know a lot of guys of my generation who've managed to avoid technology, and they're really, you know, it really affects their lives. You can see they shy away from using things. It excludes them from things. So this is about creating inclusion by becoming digitally literate. So I don't know if that helps you. We're not, by the way, I'm not here, when we talk about digital literacy also, we're not looking at creating technical geeks on every aspect of technology. This is giving kids a general awareness of, so what is the cloud? How does it function? Where is the cloud? You know, simple questions we ask the children. Part of the course it gives explanations of this, because how does the internet work? You know, does it work in the cloud? Is it a vapor? Well, it's actually wired together. We have wiring systems around the world which connect countries, and how do these technologies actually work is quite a helpful thing to understand.
Yes.
So that's one part of it. Now your supplementary question, sorry, just remind me of your second question.
So from moving people and parents from the thought process of competition to collaboration?
Yeah, it's interesting. That is an interesting question. I think it takes me into a sort of point of conversation around the way in which children should be learning in classes these days, because I do feel quite strongly that traditional teaching methods really do need to change. We need to move more schools to embracing this concept of what we call flip learning, which is essentially give the kids the learning outside the classroom and they come back into the classroom, and the teacher facilitates sort of the sharing of knowledge amongst children. You know, many of the leading schools are already well into this space, you know, changing their teaching methods in that direction. And I think, you know, that approach to learning encourages children to collaborate and share. You know, there's always going to be an element of competition. You don't want to kill competition. I don't think eliminating competition is a healthy thing. I think competition is an extremely healthy thing, as we see in the Olympics at the moment. You know, we have competition, but I think you've got to balance that, like most of these things, with healthy collaboration. And I think it does start, in a way, it starts in the classroom, very often, because kids spend a huge amount of their lives in this K-12 space in the classroom. So how that manifests in a classroom context is very important. And I do believe those, some of these new methods of teaching, as I mentioned, flipped learning, are fantastic, actually, encouraging children to sort of go off on their own, learn, go beyond what they're asked to learn, and come back into the classroom. It develops their foresight, it develops their curiosity, it helps their collaboration, it builds their communication skills.
Yeah.
And you should. One of the things I know you were going to ask me perhaps later is that I think 21st century skills should not be seen to be something which is separate to the academic skills. They should be embodied and integrated, if you like, within the way academics are taught.
Yes.
So it becomes part and parcel of the life of the children. The children are practicing their 21st century skills every day. They're learning any subject in school.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I would argue with that. I think the onus also lies in the hands of the schools and the teachers and the educators to really understand how they can do this, right? Because I think the teaching has also been a very traditional sort of approach. And you can maybe distinguish, because now you have observed the UK system of teaching versus what you're seeing in Asia. I'm sure both have their advantages and both have their challenges. But how can teachers or schools equip themselves for teaching in this new way, right? Because the curriculum remains the same. The syllabus still has to be completed. Everything has to be done. But this seems like an added layer on top, especially for very traditional schools who are still coming to terms with the real value of these things.
Well, Ritika, you hit a very good question there. I don't think it's an overhead on the existing. I think it's a change in the way you approach teaching. It's not an additional, it's a sort of switch to a new way of learning and teaching and learning. There are many schools, and there are schools in Asia that we've come across and worked with, and there are schools over here in the UK. They tend to be, I have to say, more the private schools than the state or the public schools, because they're able to invest a bit more time just to set it up and take on the switch and the change, and they're prepared to make the investment in getting the teachers to think and work differently. A lot of it, and fundamentally, it all comes down to the teacher's ability to become facilitators in a way of learning rather than teachers of facts and knowledge. Yeah, and that's, which means you're stressing the system or trying to disrupt the system from the end point, whereas teachers go into the system being taught to teach in a certain way. And in India, like in most countries, India is not wildly different actually from the UK. In the state school system here, in the Indian state school system is very similar in terms of the curriculum, and very often similar because the boards are there's a lot of overlap between the boards, obviously, between these countries. And the way the teachers have been trained traditionally is the same way. And I think, we've done survey work. It's quite interesting, actually, when we were launching our Lightbulb program, which you see mentioned on the screen behind me here. We did quite an extensive survey of both students and teachers about the introduction of 21st century skills and their appetite to change. And it was very evident in a lot of the narratives that we had back from the teachers that many of the teachers are very bored with the traditional way that they teach, because they know the children want to learn a different way. And children are learning. They learn outside the classroom these days as much as they learn inside the classroom using these technologies. So why don't we embrace that and bring it in within a structured way into the classroom?
Yeah.
You can teach, you mentioned the concern about overhead in addition to the existing teaching. No, I think it's about replacing what we're doing rather than adding to what we're doing. Using these flipped learning methods of teaching. There are many great examples already across Asia of schools doing this. This is not something that's out there and hasn't been well tried and tested. But I think it also, the other big influence on all of this is very often the education boards. We've got to be aware, particularly in India, obviously CBSE is a very dominant board, and they are always a little slower, naturally, because of the nature of the organization, I think, to promote new styles of learning. You've got NEP 2020, which is still sitting around. It's an obligation on a lot of schools still to sort of introduce some of those different structures and ways that that's suggesting. And I think the reality is, for most school leaders, the challenge is there's a lot going on every day of life in the school. So, thinking about changing the school education, the learning approach, in one foul sweep, in one big go, clearly is going to be it's going to be a massive challenge for most schools. But actually, we're working with a school at the moment down in Bangalore, where we're introducing our light bulb program using exactly that style of learning, and it's going down extraordinarily well with the kids. The kids love it. I was mentioning before we started this interview that the feedback we get from the children has been phenomenal, because they're like sponges for this knowledge. It's something which is new for them.
And in fact, what I have noticed, David, because I've worked in the edtech space in India for a very long time as well, but I mean, in the mathematics space, but over the years, what I have observed is as the newer lot of teachers come in, even with the Parent Academy, I'm working with, bachelors of elementary education, people who are part of my team. And I'm seeing that there is a lot of acceptance of, change, and they've gone through a traditional education system, but now that they are part of the education system, they want to do things differently, because they understand that children will learn, a little bit differently. They will not be willing to just simply sit and listen and be passive, recipients of information. They want to create knowledge. They want to create their own learning. And same with school owners, right? Younger school owners coming to the fore, people who are more passionate in terms of really getting down to what matters, right? How are these children going to be productive 30 years down the line in the industry as such, is something that a lot of school owners are also talking about. So I think it's actually the perfect time for a program like Light Bulb, and you all thinking about empowering people with this. But where do parents come into this? Have you also created a program for parents? Because for traditional parents, this is also a new way of thinking, right? So you need to handhold one step at a time, all the stakeholders, not just the child, but everyone else, and parents are a big part of it.
Yeah, no, Ritika, that's a very good observation, actually. And where we're introducing the light bulb program, our 21st century skills program, into schools, we, as well as obviously going through a briefing for all the teacher communities, and actually we also introduce it to the students before they get involved. We also run a program which is an awareness program for the parents. Because it is different, and again, the reaction we get from the parents is, consistently, well, this is fantastic. Why are we not doing this already, sort of thing. Because of course the parents are living in the real world, and they can sort of see, they pack off their children to school, and they go through an academic training, and they come out of schools after at the age of 16 or 18, and they file up into university, and they continue in this sort of academic sort of space. And then they hit the real world after university, and by which time, of course, the world, as we know now, the pace at which things are changing in the world of technology, everything is moving so fast. It's a bit of a shock for a lot of the kids, actually, and they don't know where they're going. So what we say to the parents is that the light bulb program is our attempt to provide a bit more balance in the education system for the children, to introduce some of these 21st century skills to them, help prepare them, as much as we can do in our little way within the school system for the future that they face, and just hope, as some of the feedback we're getting already from the schools where we're working has been hugely encouraging. Children, as I say, have got this clear ambition, interest these days. Children today are not like the children when we were kids. The world has moved on. You're a little younger than I am, and I remember still just about my age. And gosh, the world is just a very different place. And we say, actually, it's interesting, we say to our parents, kids are going in at we start at the age of 12, so year group 6 or 7 for the kids. When they leave in 5 or 6 years' time, the world will be a very different place. As they go through their schooling, the world is changing around them. They're not going out into a stable environment anymore. So that's, we're always entirely, we're very committed to engaging with the parents, and always get lovely reactions, and it encourages us to do what we do, frankly. We wouldn't be doing this if we felt there was no value to the parents and the students.
Well, that's a nice segue into my next question, which is, how did this transition happen for you personally, like being a consultant with PwC, having that high-flying consulting sort of a life to this life of an entrepreneur, especially in a new segment of education. Like, what motivated you? What got you here? And how did that happen?
Well, like most things in life, it's a little serendipity, isn't it? Nothing is ever planned out very well. But in my world, in my former life at PwC, many of the partners, as I became retired, sort of still relatively young. It's a young man's and young ladies' game, that world there. So I guess when I retired from my firm, I'd done 35 years in the business world, and I felt there was something more I could do. And I guess also because firms like PwC, it's all about people, and it's all about young people. We take some fantastic kids into our organization, and as many others do. And when we were talking earlier about what it is, how academics sit in this whole sort of system. I was reflecting on this particular point earlier, and thinking that academics are an important tick box. You've got to go through a process and demonstrate you can perform academically to a level. But actually at PwC, and I think in most of the leading companies now around the world, academics are only one element of the jigsaw puzzle, or the makeup, if you like, that we look for from the kids. It's no question there are many other aspects. We look for things like the 4 C's, clearly. We look for potential. And most importantly, actually, it's quite interesting because most of the big organizations that, whether you want, whatever it is you're going to move, the children might move into, these days, the big organizations have all become very, very proficient at running their own assessments for children. So it's a bit like, the academics are important. The university qualification may or may not be important actually anymore, because a university degree is becoming in some ways less relevant to what it was some years ago. PwC, for example, just one organization, takes kids straight out of school now. 10 years ago, that was not the case. You can go in with A levels into these major organizations. Of course, they still take university graduates. That's still a large part of their intake, but there's other routes into these organizations. But when you hit the organization, you are faced with an assessment, and the assessment can be, as I say, it's a very professional assessment that these firms do. And they're looking through all these aspects of the human being. They're not looking for one aspect of academic excellence. They're looking at all of these other things. And I guess to answer the question how I got involved in this, well, it was partly because of that, because I was surrounded. I was very fortunate to be, and those of us who worked in those worlds, some hugely bright people we deal with, and you're inspired by the kids. I have memories of young 21-year-olds coming into my office, and with such confidence, panache to do things like these are the sort of people you want to be around. You want to be around children like that when they get to 21, Yes. But I wonder how many other children don't get the opportunities that some of these people I met did. So I guess in my mind a little bit it was that I felt, there was stuff I could offer the education system from a different perspective, because I come at the education system from that world, not from the world of being, taught as a teacher or as a leader of schools. And children, I think some schools, I'd also just mention that some of the schools that I'm familiar with here in the UK, and some of the schools that I come across India and Asia, are beginning to, it's quite interesting how you create this link between schools and the workplace. I think is an interesting thing for me. And some of the schools, some of the more progressive schools, are beginning to hire teachers who've got a background from the workplace. They're not professional teachers necessarily. They're retraining, reskilling as teachers, coming in from being bankers or being in the armed services. We had
how lovely.
I came across quite a few people who were quite successful and quite senior military people who've reskilled and gone in to train in school to become teachers in schools. But of course, those experiences bring all sorts of exposure for kids in 21st century skills and life experiences, exposure for children in schools.
Absolutely.
So I'm a great fan of all that. I think that's a fantastic thing for children to have exposure to when they're young.
Yeah, in fact, that's something new that I'm coming across. I think that's a wonderful idea. But what I have observed closer to home, like with my own son's school, is that they have a regular system of calling in experts and achievers from different fields of life. there'll be a person who scaled the Mount Everest, and then there'll be somebody else who's worked in digital security. Like all of these people, regular people who've done more than, extraordinary work in their own, fields, are coming in to inspire these children, even, junior school or like 3, 4, 5 years of age. At that age, you're getting that kind of an exposure. I think it's really wonderful because it gives an access to possibilities, right? When we see people, when we see them achieving, being just regular people like us, but achieving so much more in life, I think it really opens up the doors for everyone else. And I very, very much agree with you that being in the company of young children, it just keeps you youthful. And I enjoy that a lot. This is where I think our stories sort of run very parallel. I also shifted from a consulting role in the US and came to India and then started working in the education sector without any background really in the education sector. But my idea of moving and shifting was, to India was, of course, to be closer to my family. That was a decision that I consciously made, that if I continue to live in the US, then I'll build a life there. But if now is my time to decide if I want to move back and I want to be close, to my family, and that's the choice that I made, and I'm very happy with the choice. And I've been able to luckily build a good circle of family and friends here. But from a work point of view, I wanted to see my work make an impact, and I wanted to see it much more closely than I was able to do when I was doing a consulting role. So my idea was that I should be able to see what I'm doing, how it is impacting lives, and be able to really make a dent in the education system. If I felt that it could have been better in my time, then what am I doing apart from just cribbing about it? What's the whole idea? So lovely. I think that brings us to our next question, which is, we talked about traditional academic subjects, right? So there's math, science, social studies, all of that is there. But we are also talking about these 21st century skills of collaboration and things like that. So what are some easy, I would say, methods that schools can follow? Of course, you can talk more about light bulb, but even without, let's say, a structured program, if the school is not ready for it and they want a bridge towards something like light bulb, what can they try and implement in the classrooms?
Well, I think, yes, that's an interesting question. It's quite a big question in a way, but to try and narrow down that question a little bit. Well, if I take this sort of starting point from what we're trying to do and what we're doing now with a lot of schools and students and teachers with Lightbulb, it is really just getting their minds focused on the future, really. So it's introducing some content into an education system, or in some sort of structured curriculum, where there is some learning about the future going on. This is what it is. I believe there are sort of, there's not one size fits all for all the schools here, obviously, but in terms of what we're doing in our little way with Lightbulb, is to recognize that there are probably three areas of learning that the kids need to have in some way built into their curriculum, right? Which fits this sort of issue around 21st century areas. So the first thing is around technology, of course. They need to be made aware of what are the evolving technologies, how is that going to change life that they're moving into, and how they're going to be impacted by these technologies. That's almost like a foundation that the children need to have. And I would add to that, actually, and it's a course that we offer, we actually almost insist the schools do as a sort of precursor to getting into the full life of the program, is every child does a cyber risk course. And I think there's a whole issue clearly around safeguarding on the responsibility of the school to recognise the issue of cyber risk on the children. And maybe that is the answer I should be giving you, to suggest that actually, if they're going to do anything which is going to be valuable to the children immediately, and you talk about making impact, well, this is something that has impact on the children, and it needs to keep having impact on the children, because it's not something you do once at the age of 10 or 12 and going. Cyber risks change, and they're instant, they're a threat to the children.
So yes, if you can elaborate a little bit more about cyber risks, I think that would be.
Yes, you were just asking me there about if schools are going to get going on something which is valuable for the children in this area, what would I suggest? And as I was saying, all of our courses actually start with the cyber course for the children, because the more they spend time online, which is huge, increasingly amounts of time online, they're exposed to a whole range of risks, which we make them aware of. They're also exposed to a whole bunch of issues around misinformation, because it comes, anything on the internet can obviously deliver huge amounts of misinformation, which can create all sorts of issues for the children. And of course, the third area is the whole issue of cyberbullying, and being really clear about, the implication. What is that? How does it manifest? And what are the implications? How do you manage it? So our first course is all around that. And I think every school, as I was saying earlier, I think every school really has some obligation to provide their children with that sort of foundation training, if you like. And actually, it should be a program that probably repeats every year or two for the children. Because it's a constant, these issues are constant threats. We put together actually a very interesting course on cyber, which we developed in India, and actually it's quite an Indian specific course, the one that we use mostly, because we've got, video clips of children who've been exposed to bullying, for example. We've got child psychologists involved in the materials as well, because you can pick up a lot of really quick learning by listening to people who've been through these issues. So I think, just in terms of getting the schools to start on this journey of 21st century education, I think, and bringing some of these issues into the awareness of the minds of the children, I think that would always be my start point, probably, actually. And then you can sort of map it, you can take it in different directions. You can take it into other technology areas. We do that in the way of our digital courses. You can go down the areas of introducing the children to what's going on in the world of industry and commerce. The sooner they get to see some of that stuff, the more they will get interested in different things, because they will have no clue when they're 10 or 12 years old, really what's going on out there in those worlds. We, for example, in our program, we took healthcare as one sector, which we thought was quite interesting to see how that's evolving since COVID. Of course, healthcare is changing very dramatically, mainly because of technology, of course. The pace of technology change in healthcare is huge, but it affects all of us, the healthcare sector. And the other sector, which we found quite interesting to study, which the children, I think, also give them something which is exciting to get their teeth into. So space is an interesting sector for children in India, for example. You've got a huge space agency in India, one of the top 3 or 4 in the world. Massive investment goes into it. Huge amounts of innovation happens in space, which actually feeds into other sectors. So the children learn about innovation when they study something like space. So, and the other area I would generally say that schools should be thinking about is in the whole environmental space. The environment, the whole issue of sustainability, how that manifests, net zero carbon, that whole theme there. Because the kids are going to be exposed to all of these things, and some of the children are going to really want to get involved in some of these subjects. So I think sorry, I'm not sure I answered your question specifically, but I think it's to get people going, get the children going, I think, and get the schools involved. The schools have got to decide which is the tracks they want to follow. And they, you don't need to put huge amounts of investment of time into this, because in fact, one of the courses we're running at one of the groups in Bangalore at the moment, the time commitment for the school is only about 45 minutes per week with a lesson for the children.
Nice.
It's not a huge amount of time out of the standard timetable. So, and you can achieve a lot with that. It's all doable. It's about leadership. It's about the desire to do this, isn't it, with the school leaders?
I think all of the areas that you mentioned, whether it is healthcare or space or environment, I think these are all important topics, right? We do talk about them, but sometimes it's just once in a year, right? On World Environment Day, you'll talk about it. Or, on, celebrating a space personality, you do that. But it has to become part of our regular dialogue, right? These career options, these real problems that our children need to be solving. We, at least our generation and the previous generation, I think we have done a pretty good job of making this planet unlivable in the next few years, right? So let's take up ownership and see what we can do to fix it. And there's still a lot that we can do together if we put our brains together. So I think all of this dialogue is very important. And you're right, we need to stop looking at this as an add-on. This is really the intrinsic part of the education system of 21st century learning, right? Education has evolved, at least for India, I can say, in many different ways, right? So our traditional teaching system, which was the Gurukul system, which you might have heard about, was where a child would go to a Gurukul, they will stay there for years, they will take, they'll become part of that learning ecosystem and then come out of it and then give whatever it is to the world, their potential to the world. And then with us, there has been a whole shift in the kind of education system through the fact that we had the colonial rule as well. And now we are looking at maybe fixing some of those issues that came with that kind of education system. But we are realizing that it's not just the case with India, but really a global change is happening, a global shift is happening. So on that note, my second last question to you is going to be a fun one. Have you visited India, and what are your thoughts? When you come here, what do you enjoy here? If you want to share it
But
with
you know what? I have been to India three or four times, but not since I've been in this role at DefactoED. I was in India with my firm actually a number of times.
Right.
And as I was in many countries, because my role at PwC took me to many countries, I was very lucky that, in those days, consulting took you all over the world. Yes, I spent most of my time actually in Mumbai when I was in India. And I have some very good memories actually of, meetings. And I was working at that stage, actually, I was working in different industry sectors. I was meeting different organizations, actually. And actually, Reliance was one of the organizations that I was connected with in India, which I think on most occasions I was meeting when I was there, which is one of your very successful groups. I know a little bit still about Reliance. That's an organization which has grown into an enormous global business.
Yes. You were working with them now. You would have been invited to one of the world's biggest wedding, if you're aware of that. So, yeah.
Well, I should just mention though, we recently we presented our inaugural award. What we have an Innovator in Education Award, which was presented actually to one of the esteemed leaders of the school group down in South India, and we brought the team over to the UK. We invited them to the UK. This is back at the beginning of July, and we ran an event at the House of Lords in London, which is a very privileged place to spend a day. Well, in half a day we were there actually. It was the day after the British election, so it was all quite interesting actually for everyone to arrive on that particular day. But I'm anticipating coming back to India very soon, because I think events have made it happen that the couple of occasions I was hoping to come, it hasn't quite turned out. But I will be coming back to India very soon.
Lovely. Yeah, absolutely fantastic meeting you in person, and hopefully even coming to the House of Lords sometime. Just throwing it out there.
Yeah.
As we come to a close of this podcast, I want to remind you, this is the Parenting Truth and Dare podcast, where we unpack a truth. So today we've unpacked this truth about 21st century learning and all of the things that as parents, as educators, we need to really start thinking about if this has not been on the top of our mind. So at the end, I request every guest to give a dare to the parents. What would you like them to, take action on, having listened to you and, absorbed all of this? Just one action item that they can go and follow, so that this just doesn't become something that they forget about. Really take it to fruition.
Well, this is very good. So there's a lot of things I could suggest, but at the moment, we are in a world where artificial intelligence is all happening around us, and many of the children are beginning to use these tools, ChatGPT, Copilot, Bard, all these things that you'll be aware of, and I imagine many parents will be familiar with. I think I encourage the children, and particularly the parents, to get involved in understanding a bit about these tools. It is a bit of a dare, but it's very easy. You don't have to pay. You can go online. It's all available to you at zero cost. ChatGPT offers a service, for example, which is free to use. Just go on and use these tools. Just play with them as a parent and see what's possible. If you get involved in doing this stuff yourself, you'll see what your children are up to, actually. And actually, it will influence the schools. I'm hoping by the parents getting involved in more of this technology that's available to the children, and which the children are already using, by the way. That will just stimulate the schools to sort of come into some sort of awareness that they need to bring it into their school system more rapidly. They will do. This is going to happen in schools.
Yes.
It may take a few more years, but it will. It cannot. You know, the tide has turned. There's a whole wave of technology coming at the schools, and I think for the parents, it's fantastic. Also, you'll find that I use ChatGPT myself at home for doing stuff. You know, if I have to write something quickly, or I was looking for a route somewhere the other week. My wife had to disappear off to Central Europe. So how did we get there quickly? So you ask ChatGPT and it gives you an answer.
Absolutely.
So explore, play with these tools. Be aware of some of the limitations because they're not always perfect, but that's because of where they are in their evolution. But just experiment as a parent. It's good to experiment and get down to that wavelength with your kids.
Yeah, I think it's a lovely dare that you gave because it also will get the parents thinking about some key issues like what is the ethical use of these technologies, right? So once a parent starts questioning and starts, that dialogue within, they can then have that larger dialogue on the family level as well. Because these are wonderful tools. Like I use ChatGPT as a personal assistant. Honestly, I mean, I feel my productivity really goes up when I'm able to give the right kind of prompt and, be able to, and now when I hire people for my work, it's not like I discourage them. In fact, I encourage them. And this is one of my questions, right? Are you familiar with things like ChatGPT? Are you familiar how you can use them to leverage and do your work better and faster? Because this is the way that we need to talk, right? We need to stop being afraid of this and stop thinking that this is copy pasting, because it's not. It's only giving you more and more structure to do your work more efficiently. So I think that's a lovely dare for parents to take back.
I'd be very interested to hear the feedback from your parent groups as to their reaction to that and how many take it up the dare, actually, what the outcome is as well.
Absolutely. Well, I must thank you for your time, David. This has been lovely, and I have really taken back so much from this conversation. And I'm sure our parents will be delighted. Where can they find you and your work, or even, what would be the best way for people to connect with you?
Well, you can see, I'm imagining you may be able to pass my email contact or website address across your network. Please share that. Lightbulb is the program that I'm referring to, which is our 21st Century Skills program. I'm always delighted to speak to parents on whatever subject. So if any of your parents have an inclination to call me about 21st Century Skills, you're very welcome to do so. I love what Ritika's doing. I should embarrass her by saying I think she's she's at the vanguard of parent education and parent networking. I think she's doing a great job across India. So congratulations to you, Ritika.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time and have a lovely day, David. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.